Aaron Rodgers really had a down year this past season because he was 22nd in expected points added and also success rate, which shows that he wasn't effective deep down the field or on a play-by-play basis either. And a lot of that you can say is because he had a bottom 10 receiving unit in the league, but a part of it too could be that he just checked out mentally because he was kind of done in Green Bay. I'm not really sure what to prescribe, but it is a little bit worrisome he struggled as much as he did because on the bright side in Green Bay, he had a top 3 pass blocking offensive line, which he's not going to have in New York now. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows for Rodgers moving from Green Bay to New York. Speaking of offensive lines as well, the Jets really struggle there because they were 4th worst in pass blocking and 6th worst in run blocking according to PFF grades. That's also what graded Green Bay so highly last year was PFF. So there is a real transition to be had. One real reason for optimism, though, is that Mekhi Becton missed all of last year to injury and is now expected to be healthy this year. So if he plays, we have a baseline of play for him that is really solid because the last time he really got snaps was in 2020, where he ranked 31 out of 79 offensive tackles, again, according to PFF. So when he is healthy, he's really, really solid. That was his rookie year, mind you. But the issue is he's not been playing. And another reason that things might be a little bit better for the Jets is the fact that Laken Tomlinson also really struggled last year, which sounds a little bit backwards to say that somebody struggling is a reason to be optimistic, but he has a really good baseline of play, so he has historically been good. He just had a down year perhaps this past season. Looking at their depth, they don't have very good depth at that position as well because they have Wes Schweitzer, who is a really solid backup guard, but then at tackle, they have 2 replacement level players in Billy Turner and Max Mitchell. So if anybody gets hurt, they're really going to be in trouble, and they're already kind of in trouble as is. As far as the weapons go, though, there's a lot more reason to be excited because first and foremost, they have the Offensive Rookie of the Year in Garrett Wilson, who's already in the top 10 conversation for wide receivers, as he finished 22nd in yards per game with Zach Wilson as his quarterback. That is really, really impressive. That's more impressive than some guys finishing in the top 10, in my opinion, because a lot of the guys in the top 10, they have a really good quarterback play that elevates their play as well. Wilson was doing it, dragging Zach Wilson along. As there are other options, it's not quite as good because Allen Lazard is just a solid number 2. He was 30th in yards per reception, which is really solid, but he wasn't really great as a overall threat. But he does possess some ability to go deep downfield and get good yardage that way. McCole Hardman, he should be a deep downfield threat as well, but he historically hasn't really been too much of an option downfield. He's a speedy option, though, as a wide receiver 3, so they have a pretty nice skill set blending. And then Randall Cobb is brought in as Aaron Rodgers' guy. He's an okay wide receiver 4. He's not really exciting. At tight end, things are really solid there. They have Tyler Conklin and CJ Uzama. They're both average to above average tight ends, so that's really nice. They have the ability to run 2 tight end sets, and they also have the ability to have 1 good receiving option at tight end at all times. In addition to that, they also have Breece Hall, who was regarded by some as the best player in the 2022 draft. So he definitely has a ton of talent. And then after him, they have Dalvin Cook, who is a fine backup, but don't get it twisted. He is certainly a backup at this point in his career. Now for their defense, this is where things really pick up because for their defensive backs, they have probably the best group in all of football. They have Sauce Gardner, who was PFF's number 1 ranked cornerback as a rookie. So he is an absolute unicorn. You very rarely see corners hit the ground running, and he hit the ground sprinting. And after him, it's more good because Michael Carter, their second corner, was ranked 18th last year, according to PFF. So that's also an elite corner right there. Their weakness, I say with air quotes, is their third corner, DJ Reed, who was 23rd out of all corners by PFF metric. They are exceptional at the defensive back room. They are a little bit more susceptible to being picked on in the safety department because Jordan Whitehead is a really nice balanced safety. He can do his work in the box or as a deep safety, but he's going to be having to do it mostly as a deep safety because their other safety, Adrian Amos, is more of a box player at this point. He's still a really solid run defender, but he's pretty poor in coverage at this point. So Amos in particular is going to be somebody that teams are going to target, and Whitehead to a lesser degree because I just don't think he's totally smooth as a deep safety, but he is more than solid in that regard. So at the end of the day, if you're going to have to attack anybody, you're just not going to be attacking these corners. So by default, you're kind of going to be throwing to the safeties if you're an opposing offense. The fun isn't only for the defensive backs for this team, though, because their defensive line is also probably the best in the league. If not, it's top 2 or 3 at a very minimum. It is absolutely disgusting, though, what they can do, because they have Quinnen Williams, who was 8th in pressures as a defensive tackle, which is super impressive. He's getting doubled on every single play, but he's still being super effective. And then they have John Franklin Myers, who's one of the most underrated players in the entire league. He's as great as a run defender as he is a pass rusher, and he's great in both regards. He can move inside as well. He's a huge edge rusher at 290 pounds. So that's part of what helps him in the run game is he can just be more physical than a traditional edge is because he's just so much bigger than a normal edge is. And he can then play on the inside on passing downs, which is just terrifying. If you have Quinnen Williams and John Franklin Myers as your defensive tackles on a third down, you might as well just get to punting because you're going to have no time in the pocket whatsoever. And then you're also going against great defensive backs. It's just going to be a disaster for your offense. On the edge regard, they have Carl Lawson, who's a premier pass rusher. They have Michael Clemens, who's a great run defender. Bryce Huff is another really good pressure getter. Jermaine Johnson, he's solid in both aspects. He can get after the passer, he can defend the run. And then Will McDonald was a first-round talent they got late in the first this year. So it's obnoxious, the degree of talent they have. They can cycle in so many talented guys that everybody's always going to be fresh and at their best. And when they're at their best, this is about as good of an edge room as you'll ever see. And really, again, the interior is not bad. It's just not nearly as good as the edge room because the edge room is so otherworldly. They have Al Woods, who's a really nice second defensive tackle. And then they have Solomon Thomas as well, who's a fine rotational guy. He can do some things with his elite athleticism, but it's really the depth on the inside is a lot more lacking than the depth on the edge. And I think you're going to see a lot of the edge depth bleed into the interior. And I think you're going to see some smaller packages on these third down passing situations because there's just so much talent in the edge room. You want to see those guys on the field as much as you can. To round out their defense, they have another solid aspect. I would say it's not a true strength, and that's the only part of their defense that's not a true strength, is the linebacker room. But even still, it's not an issue by any stretch. CJ Mosley was PFF's 30th ranked linebacker, so he's a solid linebacker for sure. And they have Quincy Williams, who's not quite up to par. He was ranked 62nd out of all linebackers. I believe it's about 80 linebackers in total. So he's not elite, but he's not really an issue either. And that's going to be another thing is offenses are going to be typically attacking the linebacker rank just because, like I said, with the safeties, you can't attack the corners. So you're going to have to go somewhere. And I think the linebacker room will get attacked a fair amount, but even still, you're not talking about them being real defined weaknesses, or having real defined weaknesses, I should say. They're still pretty solid in that regard. So it's not a strength, but it's not going to be a glaring weakness. I think other teams will be targeting the linebacker ranked as much as they can, but that's more so just you want to not throw to Sauce Gardner under any circumstances. And that's really terrifying to think about because Sauce is going to be guarding your best player more than not. And yeah, you're just going to be kind of ruling him out for much of the game just because Sauce is probably better than your best receiver. There might be a couple exceptions to that, but for the most part, you're not going to have any success throwing there. And then you just go down the line again. You're not going to have success throwing to your second option because they're probably not going to be as good as the second corner for the Jets, or the third is going to be DJ Reed. He is exceptional as well. You're just going to have to throw to the linebackers kind of just by default. And I think you'll have some success. CJ Mosley is not the greatest coverage linebacker, but he's still good enough. And Quincy Williams, he has the athleticism to be a good coverage linebacker. So it's not going to be ideal throwing there, but it's going to be better than throwing to the corners again. To round out their entire team, they have really solid coaching, but the issue is it's very, very conservative, at least historically. Robert Saleh is one of the most conservative coaches on fourth downs, but it's hard to say what percent of that is him naturally being that way and what percent of it was he had Zach Wilson as quarterback and just didn't trust him on fourth downs. With Rodgers, I would like to see Saleh be a bit more aggressive and leaving the offense out there because worst comes to worst, the defense is still probably going to be able to show out and protect the field position for you. So I would like to see them leaving less of the game in the hands of their punter, or in some cases their field goal kicker as well. But it remains to be seen if Saleh is going to be more aggressive or not with Rodgers. It's hard to project. One thing that's known, though, is that there should be no ill transitional effects for their offense because Nathaniel Hackett is someone Aaron Rodgers is very comfortable with. So there should be a total amount of cohesion. There should be no playing catch up, especially because 2 out of the 4 receivers Rodgers is going to be playing with the most, he's already played with an extended period of time in Green Bay with. So there should be a really good comfortability level, and I think there really shouldn't be any trouble getting used to the scheme for the offensive side, and defensively, it's just going to be more of the same. So what does that leave the Jets? I have them squarely as a top 10 team. I have them actually ranked as the 10th best team, but they're right there with Baltimore. It's kind of splitting hairs, and I have the Jets clearly defined as a Super Bowl contending team. The reason they're not squarely in the mix as a Super Bowl favorite is because their offensive line really is a bit problematic. It was super weak last year, and there's reason to think it's going to be better this year, but it's hard to project them going from as poor as they were last year to being an average bunch, which I would say for the most part, you kind of need at least an average line. And if you don't have an average line, you're going to have super receiving talent. And yes, Garrett Wilson is exceptional and is already in the top 10 mix, but I think there's kind of a fall off after him. So I don't think the wide receiving play is going to be enough to uplift this really poor offensive line for the most part. The offensive line, they're just going to have to be good on their own because the receiving talent is very good, but I don't think it's otherworldly good. That's the thing, though, is if they can be, or if the offensive line can just be solid, this team is going to be terrifying because their defense is legitimately stacked and they stand a real chance to beat anybody on any given day.